Today, I'm going to walk you through a super simple method of generating passive income for yourself using Figma. We're going to create a hand-drawn vector library. I'm just going to take you through my process of doing this, how we make the drawing on Procreate on my iPad. You can also do this on pen and paper. You don't have to be fancy. Then moving it into vector shapes on our computer, and then finally organizing it in a neat Figma file that we can then sell if we want to, or upload to Etsy or anything like that. Let's get started. So as I said, I'm going to be doing this using my iPad and my Apple Pencil, but you can do this on pen and paper if you want. Let's jump into Procreate and just show you how we're going to set up our canvas. Now I'm going to click on the plus. I'm going to select an A4 just because that's kind of the style that I want to work with. Now I like to put a drawing guide on my canvas, so go into actions and then toggle on drawing guide. And then in the settings down below, I'm going to turn the opacity to be a bit lighter and then change the size to around 30 pixels. This just gives me a guide while I'm drawing, so I can make my arrows nice and straight. I'm going to select monoline and I want you to tap on it and just make sure that stabilization is on around 50%. This will allow you to get really nice and clean lines. I also like to save the line width that I'm working with, so select one that works for you, and then when you tap into it, you can click on the little plus to save it. Once I do that, I zoom in and I start drawing my arrows. Now you can see here, this is the Procreate generated, just like speed recording. I am by no means going this fast. This is just like the sped up recording. And you can see that I'm drawing my arrows and I'm deleting things, changing things around. I might move things a bit just to accommodate for space for more items. And this is what I want you to do. We all have the capability, even if you're not designers or you've never done this before, we all have the capability of drawing kind of random things that we see. I also go online and just Google, let's say, arrows, and that gives me inspiration, and straight away I have ideas for more arrows that I can make. So at this point, I've created all of my arrows and I'm kind of happy with them. I like the way that they look. I like the way that they're kind of structured out. I feel like I have enough of them. There's probably around like 40 of them here, something like that. And I'm happy with the variations, with the different size and all of that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to triple my work just like that. The way I'm going to do that is by drawing over these arrows that I literally just made. I'm going to draw over them and create them again with a thinner pen and then with a thicker pen. And then I've created 3 variations of the same arrow. Okay, so I've done the work once and I'm going to triple it now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another layer on top of my previous layer, then turn down the opacity on the first layer. I'm going to take the same brush that I used, but I'm going to use a smaller kind of pen size. Then I'm just going to draw over my arrows. So this way I'm not remaking anything. The whole ideation process and the thinking of how I'm going to do my arrows has already been done. At this point, all I'm doing is just drawing over it. Okay, so it's gonna look to the person using it as if it's like 2 different kinds of things, but for me, I know that it was a super simple task that's gonna generate a lot of use. So I've now created my thin arrows and I'm happy with them. I can see that I kind of used, show you this. I kind of used, I didn't want to fill them. I kind of used the stripy thing on top of them because I felt like that works better with the thinner pen and gives it an extra kind of bit of characterization and personalization for it being thin and not the normal one. Now, when it comes to using the thicker pen, I decided that I don't actually want a thicker version, but I want a textured version instead. So once I decided on the pen that I want to use, I went through the same process again. I turned off the thin layer and then created a new layer for the textured one and turned on the opacity on the normal one. I selected this pen that's called Ink Bleed. I felt like this one has some texture, but not too much texture, where I know that later I'm going to vectorize it on my computer and it can get a bit much if you do something that's like crazy with lots and lots and lots of touch points and stuff. But I found that this one is okay. So I just kind of went over all of my arrows just like I did before. So now I've got my 3 layers here. I've got a normal version, a thin version, and a textured version of my arrows. I did do a bit of adjustments just to make sure that everything looks clean. I also like to turn on the opacity and put them on top of each other like fully 100%, just to make sure that they look very similar. So I know that some of them, the lines aren't exact, but I want to keep them as exact as I can. So if someone is switching between them, it's not a massive change. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to export these as individual images into my computer so then I can vectorize them later. So I'm going to go to my layers panel, make sure that everything is at 100%, and then I'm going to turn off all of the layers that are not the layer I want to export. Super important to turn off the background layer as well. I'm going to go into my action menu and then export as PNG. Once I do that, I either can save it to my iPad or can save it in my files, whatever works for you. I'm just going to save it to my iPad and then repeat the process for each of the different styles. So turning off normal, turning on thin, exporting, turning off thin, turning on texture, exporting. Then at the end, if I want, I can like turn on the background and also export one with the normal one on in case I want that kind of image to use later for promotional material or something like that. Now we're going to do the fun bit, which is bringing these into our computer and vectorizing them. Now, if you didn't do this on iPad, that's also absolutely fine. You can draw it on a piece of paper and then take a picture and upload the picture. Just make sure that the image that you're taking has no shadows in it. So it's really a crisp white piece of paper and the drawings on top of it. I'm going to create an Illustrator file, new file. I'm going to use the same file size that I had on my canvas in Procreate. So A4 works great. Now for this layer, I want you to put a rectangle kind of down beneath and give it some sort of color. The reason that we're doing this is because later when we are creating our vectors, they might get a white background and we want to make sure to see that and remove it quickly. So we're just going to create that, lock this layer and create another layer on top. I'm going to go into my file and I'm going to bring in the image of one of the styles. We're going to do them one at a time. So I'm going to bring in normal. And because I used the same file size, then I know that it's going to bring it in perfectly. So I'm going to just adjust this like this. So it fits in perfectly, great. Now I want to trace over this in order to create vectors. So I'm going to go into Window and go to Image Trace. Once I have that, please make sure that Advanced is open because I want you to see all of these options. Now I'm going to click on Preview and it's going to give me a warning that it's too big a file, blah, blah, blah. That's fine, just say okay. And then first thing, we already see that it's given it a white background and I don't want that. So I'm going to say Ignore White. Then I would encourage you to kind of just zoom in. I'm using Option and then just my mouse wheel. And you can see that the paths I'm pretty happy with them. They look pretty clean. You can play around with all of these kind of modes here in the advanced section. Let's say give it more corners or less corners, makes it a bit smoother or just a bit different really. If at any point you're unhappy with what you've done, you can just jump back into default and then just make sure to tick Ignore White again. So because I have the preview on, I don't have the trace button because it's already kind of traced over it. But if you didn't do the preview, the first step is clicking on trace to make this happen. The second step is to expand the paths. So I'm going to click it here in the quick actions. I'm going to convert them into paths and you see, whoa, so many. And then I'm going to ungroup them. Okay. Once you've done that, you can close the image trace window and go into layers and you will see that this layer is just filled with paths. And we're very happy about that. So right now we've created these vectors, super simple, right? What I want to do now is just group some of them together because, for example, I'm going to zoom in again. We know that this one and this one belong together, but Illustrator is treating them as two separate things. So I'm going to select both of them just with my mouse and selecting Shift, and then I'm going to group them. So I can either right click and group, or I can use Command and G. Once they're grouped, you see in the layer panel as well, it does that. So I'm just going to quickly group all of the ones that I need to group now. Don't forget that any of the dotted line arrows, Illustrator's not going to know that they're the same thing. They're going to treat them as separate paths, so we want to group them together. Anything that's not touching, you need to do that yourself. So I've grouped all the ones that I've needed to group. Now I'm going to go into Asset Export over here. And by the way, if you don't see any of these menus that I have on Illustrator, just go into Window and you can just find them in there. I'm going to select everything, just Command A is the easiest way about it. And then I'm going to drag it into here. Now this is going to take each path on its own or each group on its own and show me them as an asset. So just scroll through here one more time to make sure that nothing is looking weird or is a tiny section or is an empty section, so we know that all of our arrows look correct. Now I'm going to export these. So I want to export them as SVGs, which are vectors. If you want to sell these also as PNGs, you can also export them as PNGs, but let's just do it at SVGs first of all, and then bring them into Figma. So I'm going to click on the bottom one and then the top one, holding down Shift just to select them all. And then I'm going to export and just select where you want to export them to. Now we're just going to repeat this process for the thin and the textured. And with the thin and the textured, you are definitely going to want to make sure you zoom in and look at those image trace settings, because for them sometimes, especially with the textured one, you're going to want to adjust it a tiny bit to make sure it's not too crazy. By the way, image trace can trace colorful images as well. You have a color setting there ready for you to use, so don't be discouraged that it's all black and white. Great, so we've exported all of our vectors. The next thing that we're going to do is bring them into Figma and just organize them into components and make them really nice and neat. Even if the final destination of your kind of vectors or stickers isn't going to be in Figma, I would recommend bringing them in because it's really easy to organize, make promotional material, do the naming of it in Figma. It's just like super simple. And I'm going to show you how to make them into super smart components that you can then sell on Figma or just publish to the community for free. So I'm going to open my folder and then just select some of my arrows. I'm going to go with kind of the first 2 lines that I see here. So I see it's 16 of them and just drag them in. So because they're SVGs, they're going to be dropped into frames. So if I zoom in and just show you, for example, I'm going to drag this here. It's going to be a frame. Inside of that frame, I'm going to have a group and then a vector. So a lot of layers. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to extract all of these vectors because I don't need this mess. So I'm going to select everything and then using my handy trick to select the children, I'm going to click on enter and you see in the layers panel it went 1 level down, so selected the children and then enter again, and I've now selected all the vectors and then I'm just going to drag them out. I have loads of empty frames here, so I'm just going to delete them. So you see vector, 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 vector. Again, because I want these really neat and organized and later I want to present them and use them, what I'm going to do is just help tidy up a bit. So I'm going to move them to be like kind of organized-ish, you know, one under the other with the correct kind of directions, because I know that most of my arrows have the same kind of directions. So I'm going to do that for every single one, and I would really recommend taking your time with this, okay? We don't want to dump everything in because it's going to be such a mess and it's going to be really hard to find things. So do it one step at a time. I just want to show you first how I'm going to do it with one that is grouped. So for example, this one, if you remember, because it's 3 separate vectors essentially in a group. So if I just open this, you see that the layer is different. I have the group like the other ones had, and then another group and 3 vectors inside of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to vectorize this again into 1 vector. So the best way to do this is click on the frame and just enter, enter, enter until you select all of the different vector shapes. And then I'm going to vectorize them. So I'm going to Command E. Now they're 1 vector. And this vector, I can take it out of the frame and remove the frame. Fabulous. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for all of them and then organize them neatly. So by the magic of editing, I finished this. It actually took quite a while, but again, I'm going to show you how we do it once and then reuse it multiple times, so I don't need to do this whole process for thin and for texture. So I can see everything now. I just made it look, I didn't think about how I want to organize it now for later. I just organized it exactly the way that it was on Procreate and moved all of my little vectors in here. Now, all of these are called vector right now, so I'm going to select all of them and rename them. So I'm going to Command R and I get my kind of renaming one, 98. Whoa, I made 98 arrows. How many did I think they were? 40? Jesus. Anyway, now I'm going to rename them. So I'm going to rename them to normal. If you have different styles, colors, anything like that, just name them that, because I want to be able to differentiate these arrows from other ones later on. So just call all of them normal. Rename, normal, 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 normal. And then I'm going to group them. So Command R and just say normal. Remember how I said we're not going to have to do this whole process again for thin. So I'm going to show you my trick on how to just speed up your process. I'm going to duplicate this. So I'm just going to Command D to duplicate this group and bring it over here. I'm going to go to the original normal group and just lock it. So I know that I'm not touching it and I have my normal ones there and they're not going to get ruined. I'm going to go to this one over here and then ungroup them. Great. I can keep them all being called normal because that's going to change in a second anyway. So I'm going to go into where I exported my thin arrows into. You see the naming went a bit weird here, but it's fine. It really doesn't matter. And I'm going to select again a small chunk and bring them in. I'm going to do the same thing I did before. Click on enter, enter until I just get the vectors and pull them out of there and delete the frames. Now I'm going to bring it closer and I'm going to show you how I just speed up my process. This one matches with this one, right? So I'm going to click on it, Command X. So I'm going to cut it and then select this one, right click, paste to replace. So it replaces it in the exact same place that the other one was, which means that I don't need to drag it. I don't need to reorganize it. I just need to find its equivalent within this kind of normal layer. So Command X, and then I go here, paste to replace. Oh, that's wrong. Command Z. It needs to go here. There we go. The keyboard shortcut for this is if I Command Z, I just Command Shift and R, and that will paste to replace. I'm going to do that quickly now. So I've done this process super quick, just cut, paste, or replace, just need to find their equivalent, and it makes it super simple. While doing this, I even noticed that I was missing one, so I went back into Illustrator and just exported it again to make sure that I had it. I'm going to now select all of these and just Command R and rename them to thin. So now I know that I have the differentiation. These arrows are called normal, these ones are called thin. I'm going to repeat the process exactly the same with the textured ones. Fabulous. So I now have 3 of these kind of sticker sheets. I've got my normal ones, my thin ones, and my textured ones. And I made sure to name these ones texture, these ones thin, and these ones normal. And they all look exactly the same. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put these together because now we're going to turn them into components. So I need the normal, the thin, and the texture to be next to each other neatly, so then I can group them into a component set. Because what I want to do in the end is have, let's say, one arrow, and then you can decide on the different directions of it and the different styles in one component with variations. So let's do that. So first of all, because we've done so much work, I want to protect it. So I'm going to just Command A, and then I'm going to duplicate. So Command D, duplicate, move these down, select the original ones, and just maybe group them again and just lock them and say OG arrows. Yeah, so they can just remain there. And I'm going to play around with these. So I'm going to ungroup. I'm going to select them and say ungroup. Then what I like to do is I'm going to select the top ones, bring them down, and just put them underneath each other. Yeah, just like that. And what that means is that it's going to create kind of a thing where I can then group all of these, etc. So I'm just going to put them one underneath the other so I have sets of the same arrow next to each other. So I've organized them, it took a while, and I also kind of clumped them together into what I think could go together later on. This isn't my final decision, but I kind of did it in a way where I have some straight arrows here, straight but decorative, wider ones, then some like archy ones and circly ones, then corner ones, squigglies, just like icon-y type ones, and then like proper squiggles, and then some shapes. So this is kind of how I wanted to do it, and you can see that all of the different styles are one underneath the other. Now I used a lot of tidy up and all of the alignment tools to help me out with this, but again, I'm a super neat freak, so I like everything super organized, but you don't have to do this if you don't want to. So the next thing we're going to do is now we are going to start creating these into components. But before we do that, I want us to use some naming tricks that will make sure that this process is like 5,000 times faster than it could be without it. So I'm just going to show you what it looks like when you create a component and what the names turn into. I'm going to click on R and just create 2 rectangles over here, and I'm going to make one of them a different color and maybe a bit like have an angle. Yeah. So select both of these and say create component set. Then let's see. Let's say the property is color, and then this one is gray, and this one is red, and then we're going to create another property. So let's add another variant property and say that the property is angle, and then this one is true. No, sorry, this one is false, and this one is true. So we are familiar with this process. If you don't know how to use components and variants, go and watch my component session. I'll link it somewhere here, but this is a super simple process. If we look at our layers panel now, you can see that, let's say this red one, it's now going to be called color equals red, comma, angle equals true. Now, what this means is that Figma is going to rename this kind of shape for us and say property equals value, property equals value. So what we can do in order to make our lives so much easier is we can rename all of these arrows before we turn them into components according to this structure. And that means that when you turn them into components, the variants will already be there with the exact properties and variants that you want. So you're basically batch making these. Yes. So because we already named these as normal, thin, and texture, so anyone that I select, you will see that it's just kind of has the right naming to it. what I can do is already create my first property for all of them, because I know some of them will have direction, some of them will maybe have a filled and unfilled state, but the one thing that all of them will have is those 3 different styles. So I'm gonna select everything and Command R. And the way I want to name my property is going to be style. So I'm going to say style equals, now because they're already named normal, thin, and texture, I'm just going to say current name, which means it's going to use the current name of that vector. So if it's called normal, it's going to be normal, thin, or textured, and change it. So rename. Already all of my layers have that first property and value on. Brilliant, right? That's amazing. My next property is going to be direction. Not all of my arrows are going to have this property, but a lot of them are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of the ones that are going to have this property. And this is a really like logic kind of tip, but I'm going to add that property and then add the value separately. All of these arrows, right, they have different directions, right? Some of them are to the right, some of them are to the left, and I'll have some arrows later on that will have an up and down. These arrows, for example, they don't have a direction because they're double-sided. So I'm gonna click on Command R, and I'm gonna say, first of all, I want the current name, so style equals whatever the style is. Then I need a comma for separation between the 2 properties, space, and then direction equals. Now I've renamed it. So all of these have style equals whatever their style and then the direction. Now I'm going to select all the ones that go right. Just holding down Shift and selecting. And then Command R, and I'm just going to say current name right. Now I know I've already created the space before, so I don't need a space here, and you can see it in the preview as well. But if you didn't, you can add that space now. And then I'm going to rename. So all of these ones are called style, whatever their style is, comma, direction, right. I'm going to do that again for the left ones. So I'm going to select all of the ones that are going left, just like that. Command R, current name, and left. Voila. So all of these now are super neatly organized in a way that the properties and the values are already there. So when I go into here, once I'm happy that I have all of my kind of properties ready to go, when I click on these arrows and say create component set, this will already be here. So my properties, style, normal, textured, and thin, my direction, left and right. So when I go into here, and I'm just going to pull this arrow out of the assets panel, you can see I've got all of these already in here. I know! Isn't this incredible? It just makes life so simple. So I'm not going to go through every single one that I did because it still takes some time, but select all of the ones that will have that same kind of property. So let's say direction, I'm going to add comma, direction equals to a lot of them, and then just go individually or kind of in batches and do the right and the left, clockwise, anti-clockwise, up, down, whatever it may be. And then for some of them I did, like for these ones, I added a filled and then true and false. But yeah, and then I'm just going to show you the final result. So lots and lots of work, but super happy with how it turned out. All of these have, so many different states to them. I also added little emojis just to make it a bit nicer, and added some arrows and stuff like that, but you really don't have to do it if you don't want to. Now, the next thing I need to think about is how I'm going to name these components so they make sense. So I can just name them arrow 1, arrow 2, arrow 3, but I don't think that's going to be very indicative. So the way I think I'm going to do this is I'm going to give them loads of kind of descriptive adjectives to make it so that if they are in a folder, if I'm going to sell them as just like a folder with some SVGs, or if they're on Figma, or if they're anywhere, someone can search for something that makes sense to them and they will find all of the arrows that make sense. So the way I'm going to do this is, again, using my battery naming tool. So for example, I know that all of these arrows, minus this one probably, are straight. So I'm going to Command R, and then I'm going to say straight. Now I know that this one and all of these are kind of archy, right? So I'm going to say arch, and then all of these are probably corner, Now that is just one kind of word for each. But now let's go through and do some sizes. Let's select, for example, I'm just going to do it on this little bit here and then just show you the final result. But for example, all of these ones, I'm going to say that they are small, right? Or short. So I'm going to do current name, super important. Don't forget the current name because that's all the work you've done so far. Then I'm going to just add a comma and say short. But I'm also going to say small because I don't know what people's thinking is going to be. Are they going to look for a small one or for a short one? In both cases, this works. So I'm just going to say that and then rename. So you see already I'm getting more descriptive in that and getting more and more kind of ways that people can find this error when they're looking for it. Yeah, so I'm going to go through and do that for all of them, to do small, double-sided, anything like that. So once I finish adding all of the descriptors on there, I'm going to go into the assets panel. I'm not going to do it now because it's a lot of work, but I'm just going to have a look and see that none of them have the same name. It's going to sort them alphabetically, and you can see that right now a lot of them have the exact same name, which means that I won't be able to find the different ones. So for example, all of these are straight, short, and small, but this one is also filled triangle, yeah? And then this one is also triangle. Yeah, so this one might be straight medium. So I just want to make sure that they all have different names. So this is my final product. And what I did is, because of when it was alphabetized in the assets panel, I just kind of saw random ones at the start and I wanted to make sure that I keep them in the way that I organize them. So I like that the first ones are more the simple ones, the straight ones, then you get into the more complex like arches and icons later down. So what I did is I made sure that my layers are organized within the layers panel. So I sorted the layers according to the way that they are on the canvas using the plugin sorter, which just kind of sorts them according to the position. And then I added a number. So just Command R, number, current name. So that will just add that number. And because I know that the layers are organized, it adds them accordingly. You can also in here, I did it kind of box by box. So for the next one, I knew that this one ended in 8. So for the next one, I do number and I start it from 9. Yeah, so it kind of knows to do that. It's very smart. And that way, when I look in the assets panel, I can see these ones first of all. Also, I gave them a bit of a background color. So you can see that background color here. It's not just white, it's got a little purple tint to it. Last thing I did is I created this kind of file here that I'm going to upload onto my community file. This is little promotional material. So I just made a little cover, you know, using all of my arrows, and you can see that I can have these kind of quickly in here to change from. I did a little welcome to the library with a little preview, and then how to use the library, some screenshots explaining how to use it in Figma and in FigJam. And then a little just like, this is me, nice to meet you. Then you have the sticker sheet. So you've got all of these components, all of these assets here for you to use, and then you have the components on here as well. So I have an Etsy shop as well, so I uploaded it all onto Etsy alongside my other kind of digital planners and things that I sell on there, and you can see that I made the same images that I used in Figma. So everything I used along the way, you remember how we kept that first kind of image that we made? Just keep it. If you've organized it one way, keep that level of organization because you're going to need it later on. So I've uploaded it onto here and created those kind of ideas of how you could use it in GoodNotes. And remember how we exported them as SVGs from Illustrator? So I exported them as PNGs as well and put those two folders there alongside with a sticker pack for GoodNotes specifically on the little folder that I uploaded onto Etsy that I sell over there. If you want the sticker pack, you can go on my Etsy shop. It's linked in my bio on YouTube, and also you can find it from my Instagram, or I'm working on uploading the sticker pack with all the components and the super variants into Figma as well. But for now, I hope you learned a lot. I hope you can use this to create some passive income for yourself and just use this as a general skill as well. You saw how quick it is. Once you do it once and get into the habit of it, it becomes super, super simple. And with those quick renaming tips, really, it saves you so much work. When I found out about this, I was like, oh my God, my life is saved. Yeah, so go ahead. Everyone has the capacity to do this. Everyone is a designer when it comes to creating little hand drawings. We all sit there and doodle while we're just bored, and someone out there wants your little doodles. So don't be discouraged. Make vectors. Send me links to your vectors. Comment below if you've done this. Send us a link to your Etsy shop or to your Figma community file or anywhere so we can support each other as a community. Hope you enjoyed. Please like and subscribe for more. See you at the next one.